I shouldn't have been restoring a 100-year-old porcelain doll on the day of my eviction notice, but there I was, hunched over my workbench while rain hammered against the leaky skylight of my studio. Each drop that splashed onto the concrete floor seemed to echo my landlord's words. "And 30 days, Miss Robinson, not a day more." My fingers trembled slightly as I applied another layer of gesso to the doll's cracked cheek. The face was almost complete, a hauntingly beautiful visage with hand-painted features that someone had loved enough to commission by hand a century ago. Now she was just another broken thing in my broken life, another restoration project I desperately needed to finish to keep my lights on for another month. The community college literature class I'd impulsively signed up for was proving to be another mistake in my long list of poor life choices. The money could have covered half my rent, but I'd convinced myself that education was an investment. What a damn joke. I was 33, single, and about to be homeless in San Bernardino with nothing but a collection of half-fixed antique dolls to show for it. The gray autumn rain outside matched my mood perfectly as I cleaned my brush in a jar of turpentine, the sharp chemical scent mixing with the earthy smell of wet asphalt drifting through my open window. My phone buzzed with another text from the doll's owner, asking about progress. I ignored it. What could I say? Sorry, I've been distracted by impending homelessness. When the alarm on my phone chimed, I cursed under my breath. Literature class started in 20 minutes, and Professor Whitman had made it abundantly clear that tardiness affected grades. Not that grades mattered when you were taking classes, just to feel like you hadn't completely given up on life. I arrived at the classroom with seconds to spare, my hair still damp from the rain, the scent of turpentine clinging to my clothes despite my best efforts. The classroom was warm, almost uncomfortably so, after the chill outside, and I slid into the only available seat just as Whitman launched into his lecture on Emily Dickinson. "Hope is the thing with feathers," he began, quoting the poem with theatrical flair. "It's actually about resilience, not optimism," a clear voice cut through the classroom from my right. I turned, startled by both the interruption and the confidence behind it. The woman beside me sat straight-backed in her chair, blonde hair cascading past her shoulders, blue eyes sharp with intelligence. She wore a vintage cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her slender fingers adorned with delicate silver rings. "Miss Cox," Whitman sighed, "while I appreciate your enthusiasm, perhaps we could save the debate for after I've finished introducing the poem." "When you introduce it incorrectly, you're setting everyone up for misunderstanding," she replied, undaunted. Dickinson wasn't writing about blind hope. She was writing about the persistence of hope despite suffering. Something in her words pierced through my fog of self-pity. I found myself staring at her profile, the determined set of her jaw, the way her eyes flashed when Whitman attempted to dismiss her interpretation. This wasn't just academic debate. This was personal for her. When class ended, I gathered my things slowly, watching as she efficiently packed her designer bag. Our eyes met briefly, her gaze lingering just long enough to make my pulse quicken before she looked away. I might have left it at that, just another stranger in a classroom, if not for the chaos that followed. Rushing to catch up with her in the hallway, I collided with someone carrying coffee. The scalding liquid splashed across both our bags, creating a small disaster of wet papers and ruined notebooks. "Shit, I'm so sorry," I stammered, frantically trying to save her belongings. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at a small sketchbook I'd inadvertently grabbed from her bag, open to detailed drawings of vintage toys and restoration techniques eerily similar to my own. "You restore dolls," she said. "Not a question." "How did you—" "On 4 hands," she replied, her eyes dropping to my fingers, stained with gesso and paint. "And you smell like turpentine and history." She extended her hand. "Ain't he, I'm Sadie Cox. I collect the things you fix." I took her hand, feeling an unexpected spark that had nothing to do with static electricity. Valerie Robinson. What I couldn't have known then was that this woman, this stranger with her expensive clothes and passionate defensive poetry, would soon know every broken piece of me, including the ones I had spent a lifetime trying to hide. I stood outside Sadie's apartment building, checking the address she'd texted me for the 3rd time. The sleek high-rise with its doorman and marble entrance seemed worlds away from my cramped studio above an old hardware store. Rain had given way to crisp autumn sunshine that afternoon, making the chrome and glass of the building glint almost painfully bright. "And you're overthinking this," I muttered to myself. It was just a professional consultation. She had dolls needing restoration, I restored dolls. Simple transaction. Then why were my palms sweating? The doorman announced me, and minutes later I was ascending in an elevator with mirrors so clean I could see every flaw in my appearance. The worn elbows of my jacket, the scuff marks on my boots, the strand of hair that refused to stay tucked behind my ear. Sadie opened her door wearing jeans and a loose cotton shirt, looking somehow more elegant in casual clothes than most people did in evening wear. The apartment behind her was flooded with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows. "Once you've found the place," she said, stepping aside with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Come in." I expected minimalist luxury, but what greeted me instead was organized chaos. Glass display cases lined the walls, each housing meticulously arranged vintage toys. Wind-up tin robots stood alongside delicate porcelain figurines. Hand-carved wooden animals nestled next to early Barbie dolls still in their original packaging. "This is... I struggled to find words. "Excessive? Obsessive?" she offered with a self-deprecating laugh. "Magnificent," I finished honestly. Something in her posture relaxed at my response. "Most people think I'm crazy." "Most people don't understand the value of preserving history," I countered, following her deeper into the apartment. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught in her blonde hair, creating a halo effect that made my breath catch. She led me to a small workroom off the main living area, a stark contrast to the pristine apartment with its organized clutter of restoration tools, reference books, and works in progress. "So you restore too?" I asked, surprised. "So I try," she admitted. "But I'm better at finding than fixing. That's why I wanted your opinion." She carefully lifted a glass dome, revealing a German bisque doll from the 1882, with a cracked face and missing fingers. I leaned in, my professional interest immediately engaged. "Kessner, probably." "Beautiful craftsmanship," I murmured, gently turning the doll's head to examine the damage. And the crack pattern suggests it was dropped, not temperature damage. Our fingers brushed as we both reached to adjust the doll's position. A small, unexpected contact that sent a current of awareness up my arm. I glanced up to find her eyes on me, not the doll, her expression unreadable. "Can you fix her?" Sadie asked quietly, her voice slightly lower than before. "Yes," I answered, equally soft. "But it will take time. I'm not in a hurry." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air between us charged with something I wasn't ready to name. I cleared my throat and stepped back, focusing again on the doll. "One of fingers will need to be completely reconstructed," I said, all business now. "And the face crack requires specialized techniques." We spent the next hour discussing restoration methods, her knowledge surprising me. It wasn't the superficial interest of a casual collector. She understood the history, the materials, the techniques. "How did you get into collecting?" I asked, as she made us tea in her kitchen later. Her hands paused briefly over the mugs. "My mother started me on it. She believed broken things deserved second chances." "And your father?" "And believed broken things should be discarded and replaced with new ones," she replied, a edge hardening her voice. I recognized that edge. It was the sound of old wounds that had scarred but never fully healed, a sound I knew intimately from my own life. "And I grew up moving between foster homes," I offered, surprising myself with the disclosure. Broken dolls were the only things I could take with me that nobody else wanted. She handed me a mug, our fingers touching again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. "On to the things nobody wanted," she said softly, raising her mug in a small toast. "And the people who want them," I added. We talked until evening painted the sky outside her windows in shades of orange and purple. She told me about growing up wealthy but emotionally bankrupt. I shared stories of having nothing but freedom. We were from different worlds, yet something fundamental connected us, perhaps our understanding that everything valuable comes with cracks. As I gathered my notes to leave, Sadie hesitated by the door. "And I have more pieces I'd like your opinion on," she said. "If you're interested." What she was really asking hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. This wasn't just about dolls anymore. "I'm interested," I replied, suddenly brave in the fading light. Very interested. Her smile was slow, a little cautious, a little hopeful, like someone who'd learned to guard their happiness carefully. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in her entire collection. I left with her number in my phone and the warmth of her gaze lingering like the last rays of sunset on my skin. The antique doll's glass eyes stared at me accusingly from my workbench as I checked my phone for the 5th time in an hour. No new messages. Sadie had dropped off the Victorian-era bisque doll 3 days ago, and I'd been working late every night since, telling myself it was professional dedication, rather than an excuse to text her with my progress updates. "This is pathetic," I muttered, setting down my microbrush and stretching my cramped fingers. The October night pressed against my studio windows, the streetlights casting long shadows across my workspace. I'd been at it for hours, meticulously rebuilding the doll's damaged porcelain shoulder, using techniques perfected by restorers a century ago. The work required absolute concentration, yet my mind kept wandering to blue eyes and blonde hair. A soft knock startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at, I checked the clock, nearly midnight. Sadie stood in my doorway, holding a paper bag that smelled tantalizingly of hot food and looking slightly embarrassed. "I brought dinner," she said, lifting the bag. "Though I guess it's more like a midnight snack now. I thought you might be working late." "How did you know?" I asked, stepping aside to let her in. She shrugged, her cardigan slipping slightly off one shoulder. "Oh, you mentioned you do your best work after dark." The fact that she'd remembered that casual comment from our conversation days ago sent an unexpected warmth through me. My studio wasn't designed for entertaining. It was barely designed for working, but Sadie didn't seem to mind. She cleared a space on my cluttered table, spreading out containers of Thai food, while I hastily wiped my hands free of restoration chemicals. "Show me what you've done," she said, nodding toward the doll. I guided her to my workbench, suddenly self-conscious about the intimate space of my creative process. Her shoulder brushed against mine as she leaned in to examine the doll, bringing with her the scent of something expensive and subtle. Not perfume exactly, but something that made me want to draw closer. "It's extraordinary," she murmured, her face inches from mine as she studied the nearly invisible repair work. "And you can barely see the seam." "See, that's the goal," I said, uncomfortably aware of her proximity. Restoration shouldn't announce itself. Unlike me, showing up unannounced at midnight? She laughed softly. "Hey, I don't mind," I admitted. "Saint-I was actually looking for an excuse to text you." The words slipped out before I could filter them, hanging between us in the quiet studio. Sadie turned from the doll to face me, our bodies suddenly very close in the small space. "Is that so?" she asked, her voice lower than before. Something shifted in the air, the same electric tension I'd felt in her apartment, but stronger now, without daylight or professional pretense to dilute it. Her eyes dropped to my mouth for just a second, then back to my eyes. I felt paralyzed, caught between wanting to step back and wanting to step closer. Before I could decide, she made the choice for both of us. Sadie's lips touched mine gently at first, almost a question. When I responded, her hand came up to cup my jaw, fingers still cool from the outside air. The kiss deepened, and I tasted mint and something uniquely her. My hands found her waist, and I was surprised by the solidity of her beneath the soft cardigan. When we finally broke apart, I kept my eyes closed for an extra beat, afraid of what I might see in her face. Regret, perhaps, or worse, pity. "And I've been wanting to do that since the community college hallway," she confessed, her voice slightly breathless. I opened my eyes to find her smiling, a bit shy now, despite her boldness moments before. "That makes 2 of us," I answered. We ate Thai food sitting cross-legged on my workroom floor, talking about everything and nothing, as if we'd known each other for years instead of days. She told me about growing up with wealth but without warmth. I shared stories of foster homes, where love was conditional on behavior. Different childhoods that had somehow led us both to find meaning in forgotten things. Dawn was threatening the horizon when she finally left, promising to call later. I stood in my doorway watching her walk to her car, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in my carefully constructed world. The next day stretched out in a haze of too little sleep and too many thoughts. I turned down Whitman's invitation to debate Dickinson further after class, rushing instead to the botanical gardens where Sadie had suggested we meet. She was waiting on a stone bench, sunlight filtering through red and gold leaves to dance across her features. When she saw me, her smile was cautious, as if unsure how I felt in the sobering light of day. "I thought you might have regrets," she said as I sat beside her. "And about the kiss? No," I answered honestly. "And about letting you see my disaster of a studio? Maybe a little—" She laughed, the tension breaking. "Son, I liked your studio. It's honest." "Is that what we're being now? Honest?" Her fingers found mine on the bench between us, intertwining slowly, tied like to be. And so we were. Walking through gardens ablaze with autumn colors, we admitted our mutual attraction, our fears, our hesitations. She was recovering from a relationship that had ended badly a year before. I hadn't let anyone close enough to hurt me in longer than I cared to remember. "This is terrifying," I admitted, as we completed our second loop through the rose garden, the fading blooms releasing their last fragrant breaths into the afternoon air. "What is?" she asked. "Wanting something I might lose." Sadie stopped walking, turning to face me fully. "What if we just agree to be careful with each other?" I didn't know then that careful wasn't in our future, that passion and pain and courage would define whatever was growing between us. All I knew was that when she suggested we attend an antique auction together that weekend for our official first date, I said yes without hesitation. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, fragile as porcelain and just as easily broken. The first sign something was wrong came on an unseasonably warm November morning. I'd been dating Sadie for nearly a month, each day bringing us closer together despite our different backgrounds. That morning, I'd stepped out behind my studio to empty a bucket of cleaning solution when a peculiar smell caught my attention. I followed it to the small stream that ran behind the row of converted warehouses housing my studio and several other small businesses. What should have been clear running water had an oily sheen, rainbow colors swirling in disturbing patterns across its surface. "What the hell?" I muttered, crouching down for a closer look. The water smelled of chemicals, not the familiar solvents I used for restoration work, but something industrial and wrong. Dead leaves floated on the surface, their edges curled and discolored where they touched the water. I pulled out my phone and took several photos, then walked upstream, following the small waterway into a wooded area I rarely visited. After about 15 minutes, I found what I was looking for, a large drainage pipe protruding from the embankment, steadily leaking viscous fluid into the stream. Above the embankment stood a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by high fencing with a Roberts Corporation, emblazoned on signs warning against trespassing. I'd driven past it countless times without giving it much thought, just another industrial complex in the commercial district of San Bernardino. That evening, I showed the photographs to Sadie as we prepared dinner in my cramped kitchenette. Her hands stilled over the vegetables she was chopping, her expression darkening as she swiped through the images. "This is illegal dumping," she said, her voice tight. "Have you reported it?" "To who?" "The city will take forever to investigate, and meanwhile, that stuff keeps flowing downstream." Sadie was quiet for a moment, her knife tapping rhythmically against the cutting board. "I know some people," she finally said. "Once they might be able to help." 2 days later, we found ourselves in a community center basement, surrounded by a diverse group calling themselves the San Bernardino Environmental Action Coalition. Sadie sat close beside me, her thigh pressed against mine in the crowded room, as a passionate woman named Elena outlined their ongoing battle against corporate pollution in the area. "San Roberts Corporation has been on our radar for years," Elena explained, pointing to my photographs now projected on a screen. "What you've found gives us concrete evidence of their illegal dumping practices." I felt a strange energy in the room, part anger, part determination. These people weren't just complaining, they were organizing, strategizing, preparing to fight. The sensation was both foreign and exhilarating. "So what can we do?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. I'd never considered myself an activist. Elena smiled. "Join us. We need more eyes on the ground, more voices at city council meetings, more bodies at protests." Later, walking back to my car through the crisp night air, Sadie's hand warm in mine, I felt something shifting inside me, a purpose beyond my daily struggle to pay rent and keep my business afloat. "I didn't know you were interested in environmental activism," I said. She looked away, her profile sharp against the streetlights. "There's a lot we still don't know about each other, Valerie. There was truth in that. Despite our growing closeness, Sadie remained partly a mystery. She rarely spoke about her family beyond vague references to a distant father and deceased mother. When I pressed, she changed the subject with practiced ease. Over the next 2 weeks, we attended meetings, distributed flyers, and spent hours researching Roberts Corporation's history of environmental violations. Our relationship deepened through shared purpose, our evenings often ending with intense discussions about corporate responsibility that somehow transformed into equally intense moments of physical connection. One night, after a particularly heated planning session for an upcoming protest, we found ourselves on my studio rooftop. I'd discovered the access ladder shortly after moving in, creating a makeshift retreat with salvaged cushions and string lights. The city sprawled below us, its lights blinking like earthbound stars. "Do you ever wonder if we can actually make a difference?" I asked, my head resting on her shoulder as we shared a blanket against the night chill. "I have to believe we can," she replied, her voice vibrating against my ear. "Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" "Any of what? The activism?" "Any of it. Working, loving, living. If we can't change things even a little bit, then it's all just marking time." I lifted my head to look at her, struck by the fierce conviction in her voice. The string lights caught the gold in her hair, the determined set of her jaw. In that moment, she was breathtaking. "I think I'm falling in love with you," I said, the words escaping before I could consider their weight. Her eyes widened slightly, vulnerability flashing across her features before she leaned forward, capturing my lips with hers. The kiss was different from our others, deeper, more urgent, as if she was trying to say something her words couldn't express. When we finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to mine. "I'm scared of what that means," she whispered. "Of loving me? Of deserving it." I didn't understand what she meant then. Couldn't have known what secrets lay behind her words, or how they would shatter the fragile happiness we'd built. 3 days later, we stood with dozens of other protesters outside the main gates of Roberts Corporation, holding signs demanding accountability. The company's tall headquarters building loomed over us, its windows reflecting the cloudy sky like a fortress designed to keep secrets as much as people. I couldn't have imagined then that behind those reflective windows, decisions were being made that would test not just our budding love, but our very understanding of loyalty and betrayal. The protest outside Roberts Corporation started peacefully enough. Elena led chants about clean water and corporate accountability, while local news cameras captured our group of about 50 concerned citizens. I felt a swell of purpose holding my hand-painted sign declaring our water, our future, with Sadie beside me looking more beautiful than ever in her righteous anger. "Winter coming out!" someone shouted, and the crowd's energy shifted as the massive glass doors of the headquarters building swung open. Several men in expensive suits emerged, flanked by security personnel. They walked with the practiced indifference of people accustomed to opposition, their faces arranged in neutral expressions designed for potential news coverage. Then everything changed in an instant. The lead figure, tall, silver-haired, with an authoritative presence, stepped forward, and Sadie went rigid beside me. Her hand slipped from mine as if suddenly turned to ice. I glanced over to see her face drained of color, her eyes wide with something beyond surprise. Something that looked disturbingly like recognition and fear. "Sadie?" I whispered, but she seemed not to hear me. The man at the front, clearly the CEO or some other high-ranking executive, was speaking now, his voice carrying across the crowd with practiced authority. "Roberts Corporation takes environmental concerns seriously. We welcome dialogue with community members, but this provocative display..." I wasn't listening anymore. Sadie had taken a step backward, then another, her body language screaming retreat. When I reached for her arm, she flinched as if burned. "I need to go," she said, her voice barely audible over the crowd's responding jeers to whatever the executive had said. "What? We just got here." "Now, Valerie. I need to go now." Before I could respond, she turned and walked rapidly away from the protest, her blonde hair disappearing among the parked cars. I hesitated, torn between following her and staying with the group that had become important to me. Elena caught my eye, raised a questioning eyebrow, but I just shrugged helplessly before hurrying after Sadie. I found her sitting in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel though the engine wasn't running. Her knuckles were white, her breathing shallow and too quick. "Are you going to tell me what that was about?" I asked after sliding into the passenger seat. She stared straight ahead. And said, I don't feel well. I think I'm coming down with something. That's not what this is, I said, more sharply than I intended. And you saw something, or someone, that scared you. Was it those executives? Can we please just drop it? Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. No, we can't. Not when you're clearly terrified and shutting me out. She turned to face me then, her expression carefully composed now, though her eyes remained turbulent. Not everything is your business, Valerie. Some things are personal. The words stung like a slap. After weeks of growing closer, of sharing my life and my bed with her, to be suddenly held at arm's length felt like betrayal. Personal? I thought we were past that. I thought we were building something real. Once we are, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. This is different. Different how? What aren't you telling me? She started the car instead of answering, her movements sharp and agitated. We drove in tense silence back to my studio, where she parked but kept the engine running, a clear signal she wouldn't be staying. I need some time, she said finally, staring straight ahead. Just a day or two, to sort some things out? I got out of the car without another word, hurt and confusion warring inside me. She drove away without looking back, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with questions multiplying in my mind. 3 days passed with minimal communication, just brief texts assuring me she was okay but needed space. I threw myself into work, finishing 2 difficult restorations ahead of schedule, simply because I couldn't bear to be idle with my thoughts. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to her apartment building determined to have answers. The doorman recognized me from previous visits and let me up without calling ahead. A small mercy that spared me the possibility of rejection. When Sadie opened her door, she looked terrible, beautiful still, but with dark circles under her eyes and a pallor to her skin that spoke of sleepless nights. We need to talk, I said before she could speak. She nodded, stepping aside to let me in. Her usually immaculate apartment showed signs of neglect. Unwashed coffee cups, clothes draped over furniture, papers scattered across surfaces. Thomas Roberts is my father, she said without preamble, her back to me as she stared out her floor-to-ceiling windows. The words didn't register at first, too direct and unexpected to process immediately. When they did, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. When a CEO of Roberts Corporation, the company we're protesting? Yes. She turned to face me, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and shame. And a man responsible for the pollution you discovered. How is that possible? I asked stupidly. Her last name is Cox. My mother's maiden name. I took it after college when She hesitated, and when I cut ties with him and his money. I sank onto her sofa, trying to reconcile the Sadie I knew with this new information. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed I wasn't involved? That I wasn't some kind of corporate spy infiltrating your environmental group? The accusation hit too close to the suspicion already forming in my mind. Are you? Her face hardened. Damn it, Valerie. After everything we've shared, you think I'd use you like that? I don't know what to think. You've been lying to me since the day we met. Omission isn't lying. My father and I haven't spoken in years. He's not part of my life. But apparently, he's a big enough part that seeing him sent you running scared from the protest. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. Oh, you don't understand what he's like, what he's capable of. Scene, help me understand, I challenged her. Because right now, all I see is someone who got close to me, learned everything about our plans to expose Roberts Corporation, and conveniently turns out to be the daughter of its CEO. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Is that really what you think of me? Of us? I wanted to say no, to gather her in my arms and promise we'd figure it out together. But the hurt of her deception was too raw, the implications too disturbing. I don't know what to think anymore, I said finally, rising to leave. And until I do, I need that space you've been talking about. I walked out of her apartment with her voice calling my name behind me, each step like tearing off a piece of my heart. In the elevator down, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls, and wondered how something that had felt so right could shatter so completely in the space of a few devastating words. 2 weeks of silence stretched between us like a frozen lake, beautiful from a distance, but dangerous to traverse. I threw myself into environmental activism with an intensity born of heartbreak, attending every coalition meeting and volunteering for the most demanding tasks. Anything to keep from thinking about Sadie, her deception, and the hole her absence had left in my life. Elena noticed my increased commitment, but was wise enough not to question its source. Instead, she channeled my energy into productive avenues, having me document additional evidence of Roberts Corporation's environmental violations and coordinate with potential legal allies. "And you're becoming indispensable," she commented one evening as we packed up after a particularly productive strategy session. "And I need to feel like I'm making a difference," I replied, avoiding her perceptive gaze. "This isn't just about the environment anymore, is it?" I paused in the act of rolling up maps showing contamination patterns. "What do you mean?" "It's personal for you now," she said gently. Sai recognized the signs. Many of us started this work because we were angry about something else entirely. I wanted to deny it, to claim pure environmental altruism, but the truth pressed against my chest too insistently. "Ain't her father runs Roberts Corporation," I admitted, the words bitter on my tongue. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't seem entirely surprised. "Sadie?" I nodded, the simple motion requiring more effort than it should have. "And you think she betrayed you? Used you for information?" "I don't know what to think," I said, the admission painful but honest. "They kept it secret all this time. Who does that unless they have something to hide?" Elena considered this, her dark eyes thoughtful. "Someone ashamed of their family, perhaps. Or someone trying to forge their own identity separate from a powerful parent." She shrugged. "Oh, what do I know? I'm just an environmental lawyer who spent 20 years watching the wealthy protect their interests at any cost." Her words lingered with me on the drive home, through a restless night, and into the following morning's literature class. I'd considered skipping, knowing Sadie would likely be there, but refused to let personal turmoil disrupt the one normal thing left in my life. I arrived late deliberately, slipping into a back row seat just as Professor Whitman began lecturing on Sylvia Plath. For 50 minutes, I kept my eyes resolutely forward, though I could feel Sadie's presence 2 rows ahead like a magnetic pull on my awareness. When Whitman dismissed us, I gathered my things quickly, intent on escaping before any confrontation. I wasn't fast enough. "Valerie?" Just one word, my name, but filled with 2 weeks of unspoken emotions. I froze, my back to her, students flowing around us like water around stones in a stream. "Please," she added, her voice lower now, meant only for me. Slowly I turned. She looked worse than I felt, thinner, paler, with a fragility to her I'd never seen before. The sight pierced through my anger, reaching the part of me that still ached for her. 5 minutes, I conceded. "Outside." We walked in silence to a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, its branches nearly bare now as November deepened toward winter. The campus around us buzzed with normal activity. Students laughing, arguing, living uncomplicated lives that suddenly seemed enviable. "I've been trying to call you," she began. "I know. Once you haven't answered. And know that too." She twisted her hands in her lap, a gesture so uncharacteristically nervous that it caught me off guard. Sadie was always composed, confident. This vulnerability was new territory. "My father is not a good man," she said finally. "And I left his house at 18 and never went back. I changed my name, refused his money, built my own life. The only thing I took was my mother's collection of antique toys. He would have thrown them away after she died." I remained silent, letting her speak. "And I saw him at the protest. It was like being 17 again, powerless and terrified. I panicked." Her voice shook slightly. But I never lied about how I feel about you, Valerie. Never. And you let me rant about Roberts Corporation for weeks without once mentioning your connection," I pointed out, my voice steadier than I felt. "Then joined our coalition knowing who we were fighting against." "And joined because of you," she admitted. "But I stayed because you were right. What they're doing is wrong. What he's doing is wrong." A gust of wind scattered dry leaves across our feet, the sound like whispered secrets. "How can I trust you?" I asked, The question that had haunted me for 14 sleepless nights. How do I know you haven't been feeding him information about our plans? Pain flashed across her features. You can't know. You can only choose to believe me or not. She reached for my hand, hesitated, then withdrew. But I can prove my intentions going forward. How? He and I have access to internal communications, environmental studies they've buried, safety reports they've falsified. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I'm maybe Thomas Roberts's estranged daughter, but I still know people inside the company. People who might talk to me but would never talk to your coalition. I stared at her, understanding slowly dawning. You're offering to spy on your own father's company. I'm offering to help expose the truth, she corrected. To use the one advantage my unfortunate paternity gives me to do something right. The proposition hung between us, weighted with implications both personal and practical. Part of me, the part still raw with hurt, wanted to refuse on principle. But Elena's voice echoed in my mind. Kiss is about making a difference, not being right. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course. She stood, hesitating for a moment before adding, for what it's worth, I missed you. Every day. As she walked away, her shoulders squared with a determination I recognized. I realized something had shifted. The frozen lake between us had begun to thaw. Not enough to cross safely yet, but enough to believe that spring might come again. 3 days later, I texted her, Elena wants to meet. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., my studio. Her reply came instantly, I'll be there. The reconciliation wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend without showing scars. But as I prepared for tomorrow's meeting, arranging chairs and clearing space on my work table, I felt something I hadn't experienced since watching her walk away from the protest. Hope. The Roberts Corporation headquarters looked even more imposing at night, all glass and steel illuminated from within like a massive lantern of corporate power. Sadie's hands trembled slightly as she handed her ID to the security guard, who recognized her immediately. And Miss Roberts, haven't seen you in years, he exclaimed, using the name she'd abandoned. It's Cox now, Jim, she corrected gently. Is he in, your father? Always. 65th floor, same as ever. Sadie nodded her thanks, feeling the weight of what she was about to do press down on her shoulders. After 3 weeks of providing inside information to Elena and our environmental coalition, she was taking the final, irreversible step, confronting her father directly. I'd wanted to come with her, but she'd been adamant. This is something I need to do alone, she'd said that morning as we lay tangled together in my bed, our reconciliation still new enough to feel fragile. He'll use you against me if you're there. Now she stood alone in the executive elevator, watching the numbers climb toward a confrontation years in the making. The documents hidden in her phone's encrypted files would either force her father to change his company's practices or become evidence in the lawsuit Elena was preparing. Either way, Sadie was burning her last bridge to her former life. Thomas Roberts was waiting when the elevator doors opened, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office as if he'd been expecting her. Perhaps he had been. A man with his power surely monitored who entered his building. Sadie, he said without turning, his voice exactly as she remembered. Deep, authoritative, utterly confident. And wondered how long it would take. Hello, Father, she replied, the formal address a shield against old vulnerabilities. He turned then, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting the image of distinguished success that had graced countless business magazines. Only someone who knew him well would recognize the cold calculation in his eyes. And you've been busy, he continued, gesturing to a chair she didn't take. Making new friends, attending protests, sleeping with that doll restorer from the warehouse district. The casual mention of me sent a chill through her, but she refused to show reaction. You've been having me followed. Until I protect my interests. He walked to his desk, pressed a button. Bring in the files. An assistant appeared moments later with a folder that Thomas placed on his desk without opening. And do you know what these are? And don't play guessing games anymore, Sadie replied, standing her ground. The documentation of every environmental regulation we violated, every falsified report, every bribed inspector. He tapped the folder. Exactly the evidence your little activist friends have been searching for. Sadie's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composed expression. Why are you showing me this? And because I'm offering you a choice. He leaned against his desk, studied her face. Walk away now. From the activists, from the lawsuit you're planning, from that woman, and these files never see the light of day. And if I don't? His smile never reached his eyes. Then I destroy her. Your Ms. Robinson has quite a history. Unstable foster care placements, a juvenile record that was supposed to be sealed, tax issues with her little restoration business. One phone call and her studio becomes the target of every regulatory agency in California. White-hot anger flashed through Sadie. And you can't threaten her because of me. And not threatening anyone. I'm simply outlining consequences. His tone remained conversational, as if discussing weather rather than blackmail. And chose to align yourself against your family, against your birthright. Choices have consequences, Sadie. I taught you that. And you taught me many things, she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Mostly how not to be a decent human being. For a flicker of a moment, something that might have been hurt crossed his features before the corporate mask returned. Son, you have 24 hours to make your decision. After that, I can't control what happens to Miss Robinson's quaint little business. Or her reputation. Sadie walked out without another word, the weight of his ultimatum pressing down on her shoulders. In the elevator descending to the lobby, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, searching for strength she wasn't sure she possessed. I was waiting in my studio when she arrived, pacing nervously between half-finished doll restorations. One look at her face told me everything I needed to know. Sati threatened you, I said, not a question. No. She dropped her bag on my workbench. And he threatened you. The strange mixture of fear and fury that followed her explanation left me speechless. I'd known Thomas Roberts was powerful, but the casual way he proposed to destroy my life struck me as almost mythically cruel. What are you going to do? I finally asked, dreading the answer. Only thing I can do. Her voice was hollow. What he wants. Walk away from the coalition, from the lawsuit. From me, I added quietly. Her eyes met mine, fierce and bright with unshed tears. Never from you. Not if you'll still have me after I surrender like this. I crossed the room in 3 strides, took her face in my hands. This isn't surrender, it's survival. It's letting him win, she whispered, her hands gripping my wrists. Everything I've worked for, a life separate from him, a purpose that matters, gone because he snapped his fingers. We stood like that, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, seeking answers where there seemed to be none. Finally, I pulled back slightly. What if we called his bluff? I suggested. And you don't understand. He doesn't bluff. Everyone has a weakness, I insisted. Even Thomas Roberts. She studied my face, a spark of something like hope flickering in her eyes. What are you thinking? 2 days later, we stood in my workshop facing each other across my restoration table, the tension between us palpable but necessary for what was about to unfold. The documents Sadie had secretly copied from her father's office were spread before us, along with additional evidence the coalition had gathered. Freddie? I asked, as the clock ticked toward our arranged meeting time. Oh, no, she answered honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. The knock when it came was forceful, the knock of a man accustomed to doors opening at his command. I took a deep breath and opened mine to find Thomas Roberts flanked by 2 men, whose expensive suits didn't quite hide their security training. "Ms. Robinson," he greeted me, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "My daughter seems to think this conversation is necessary." "Thank you for coming," I replied, stepping aside to let him enter my domain, the cramped, humble workshop so different from his glossy corporate tower. What followed was a confrontation that would change all of our lives, though none of us could have predicted exactly how. Sometimes the most important battles aren't won with strength, but with the willingness to lose everything for what matters most. 6 months can change everything. The spring sunshine warmed my back as I carefully lifted a Victorian porcelain doll from its storage box, admiring how the light caught the delicate hand-painted features I'd restored the week before. Outside the workshop window, the river that had once run with chemical waste now flowed clear and clean, a testament to battles fought and against all odds won. "Is she ready?" Sadie's voice came from the doorway, her blonde hair caught up in a messy bun, a smudge of paint on her cheek from the vintage tin robot she'd been working on all morning. "And just finished her this morning," I replied, carefully turning the doll to display my handiwork. "What do you think?" Sadie crossed the room, her eyes widening as she recognized the antique doll. "That's my mother's Elizabeth doll, the one I told you was beyond repair." "Nothing's beyond repair," I said softly. "Not if you care enough to do the work." She took the doll with reverent hands, her fingers tracing the restored porcelain face, the meticulously replaced glass eyes, the hand-sewn period clothing I'd labored over for weeks in secret. "How did you even get her? I thought she was lost when She trailed off, the memory still painful. "And you surrendered your inheritance to save our environmental lawsuit," I finished for her. "Your father sent it. Last month." Sadie's head snapped up, disbelief written across her features. "Thomas sent this?" I nodded, with a note. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small card, and handed it to her. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the brief message. "And she would have been proud of you. Maybe I am too." "And I don't understand," Sadie whispered, looking from the card to the doll and back again. "And after everything, the lawsuit, the public exposure, the fines, he hates me." "And you think," I said carefully, "he might be learning that love and pride are more complicated than balance sheets and quarterly reports." The confrontation in my workshop 6 months ago had been the beginning rather than the end. Thomas Roberts had come expecting to intimidate us into silence, only to find himself ambushed by live-streaming environmental activists, pre-alerted, media, and his own daughter's unwavering courage as she presented evidence of his company's violations directly to the press. What followed was a corporate scandal, a hefty EPA fine, and a mandated cleanup operation that would take years to complete. Roberts Corporation's stock plummeted, then gradually recovered as Thomas, to everyone's surprise, embraced environmental reforms with the same ruthless efficiency he'd once applied to avoiding them. Sadie paid the heaviest price immediately, written out of her father's will, publicly disowned, her family ties seemingly severed forever. But she gained something too, freedom from the shadow that had followed her since childhood, and the knowledge that she had done the right thing, regardless of personal cost. "Do ever regret it?" I asked now, watching her cradle the doll that represented one of the few positive connections to her past. "Not for a second," she answered without hesitation. "Though I still can't believe we're actually making a living doing this." She gestured around us at what was now our shared workshop, twice the size of my original studio, with proper ventilation, specialized equipment, and enough space for both of us to work comfortably. The sign outside read Second Chance Restorations, Vintage Toys and Antique Dolls, with both our names listed as co-owners. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Her father's company now funded part of our business through the settlement agreement that established a small business grant program for environmentally responsible enterprises in affected areas. Our workshop, with its strict protocols for handling restoration chemicals and proper disposal methods, had been among the first approved. "The grand opening tomorrow is going to be amazing," I said, taking the doll and carefully placing it in our display window where sunlight could highlight the intricate restoration work. Sadie came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and resting her chin on my shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured against my ear. I turned in her arms, studying the face that had become the center of my world. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. Establishing our business, navigating the aftermath of the lawsuit, building a life together amid public scrutiny. But each challenge had only strengthened what we'd found in each other. "And you know what's strange?" I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "If you hadn't been Thomas Roberts' daughter, we might never have met. Your past is part of what brought us together, even as you were trying to escape it." "There's a poem about that," she replied with a small smile. "Oh, something about the past never being dead. It's not even past." "Faulkner, not Dickinson," I corrected, laughing. "Your literary education is still a work in progress." "A good thing I have you to teach me," she said, leaning in to kiss me softly. Outside, Elena's voice called a greeting as she arrived with the final promotional materials for tomorrow's opening. We broke apart reluctantly, ready to welcome our friend and former activist ally, who'd become our most enthusiastic supporter. As Sadie went to unlock the door, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the workshop window. Two women surrounded by carefully restored treasures, each broken thing patiently mended and given new life. In that moment, I understood something fundamental about both my profession and my heart. The most beautiful restorations don't hide the damage that's been done, but incorporate it into something stronger and more precious than before. Some might call it healing, others might call it love. Standing in our shared workshop on the edge of our shared future, I simply called it home.